Yesterday, I released a report following a multi-year investigation on the growing domestic terrorism threat. I believe we provided it to each of the witnesses yesterday. This is also available through the website, the Homeland Security Committee website, to read in its entirety. And in the report, we found that despite being required by law, my investigation found that DHS and FBI have failed to systematically track and report data on domestic terrorism. They have not appropriately allocated resources to match the current threat and have not aligned definitions of domestic terrorism to ensure consistency across the investigations of these crimes. And quite frankly, it's hard to address this rising threat if we can't quantify and define the scope of the problem so that we can tailor an appropriate response to it. And the agencies appear not to be doing that. Director Wray, we have seen think tanks and nonprofits collect more comprehensive data about domestic terrorism attacks than the U.S. government has been able to do. Why has the FBI been unable to collect and report complete data about domestic terrorism despite a federal law requiring you to do so?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know all too well that there have been frustrations in the reports that have been generated under the law that you're referring to. I think we've made progress between the first report and the second report, and we're committed to continuing to make progress. Some of the issues have to do with, if you go further back in time, before 2015, for example, we were using paper as opposed to electronic, and so the ability to go back and track earlier than 2015, I know, has been a source of tension at times. In addition, state and local law enforcement and tribal law enforcement are not required to report domestic terrorism incidents to us, and so while we do get lots of reports of that through our joint terrorism task forces, it's not as systematic as any of us would like it to be. And then you mentioned the terminology change. We have changed terminology over time. There are good reasons for that, but there is some risk then at having sort of an apple to orange type effect in the comparisons. But we're committed to continuing to work with the committee on this topic, and our data tracking limitations should in no way be confused with our commitment to prioritizing this issue. I elevated racially motivated violent extremism to a national threat priority all the way back in June, I think it was, or the summer of 2019. And we have surged resources to address that, and the pace of investigations and arrests over my first 3.5 years as director, doubled, or in the case of arrests, even tripled in this space. So we have been working hard on it, but we do need more resources in this space, and our fiscal 22 budget specifically asks for more resources to help address the domestic terrorism threat.
Well, I appreciate your work on this, and you're right. The second report was better than the first report, and I would hope that we could work closely together to make the third report even better, because that information is obviously critical for us to understanding the scope of the problem and then design appropriate responses to it. But I appreciate your active engagement in that, Director Wray. I also remain extremely concerned about the threat posed to our nation from bad actors using unmanned aircraft systems, also commonly known as UAS, to disrupt our society, or worse, to potentially conduct a lethal attack on our nation. Earlier this year, this committee unanimously passed a bill authored by Senator Johnson and I to protect our nation's airports, critical infrastructure, and public spaces from these evolving threats. Secretary Mayorkas, as you are well aware, these authorities are set to expire next month on the 16th of December. Could you explain to this committee the consequences of allowing these authorities to lapse?
Chairman Peters, I'm deeply appreciative of your and Senator Johnson's bipartisan effort to propose legislation to not only continue our authority to counter unmanned aerial systems, but also to expand it critically. And that need is very grave. Just yesterday, I was meeting with experts who were speaking of the increased efficiency, sophistication, and capability of drones in terms of their visibility, the speed with which they can move, the distance with which they can move, and also the loads that they can carry. And this poses a real threat, and we see it very, very often, sometimes by innocent operators who mistakenly interfere with the airspace and cause aircraft to reroute their journeys, to bad actors, and we see it quite tragically in the war zone that Russia created with its unprovoked assault on Ukraine. These are extraordinarily sophisticated tools that can carry drugs, that can launch weaponry, and we must be able to counter it. It is only an increasing threat, and we hope that Congress passes the legislation that you and Senator Johnson have proposed.
Thank you, Secretary. We have limited time, and I'm going to keep strict to 7 minutes for everybody. Director Wray, the FBI is the lead on protecting mass gatherings like the Super Bowl and other areas. How concerned are you about these authorities lapsing?
We're deeply concerned, and we appreciate this committee's leadership on this topic. If that authority, it's important for Americans to understand that if that authority is not reauthorized next month, that public gatherings, like the Super Bowl in Arizona, like New Year's Eve in Times Square, like Formula One in Las Vegas, and I could go on, none of those things will have protection from this threat. And all the times that we have deployed with the authority that this committee has led the passage of before, we've located hundreds of drones that have been acting in violation of federal law each time. And as the threat continues to grow, we're investigating, even as we speak, several incidents within the U.S. of attempts to weaponize drones with homemade IEDs. And that is the future that is here now, and this authority desperately needs to be reauthorized.
Thank you, Director Wray. With 8 minutes left in my time, Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized for your question.